everybody. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christiaan.
And welcome to Unstable Reactor from Dissecting Fiction, a little bit of a new format for you. Let me explain this. Either Christiaan or I will pick something that we're fairly familiar with and give it to the other who we are going to make sure is not all that familiar with. We're going to talk a little bit about the history, and then we're going to talk about some very pure reactions to what we watched. I think this is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, we picked we picked kind of like the opposite spectrums on this one. I picked like a very avant-garde film, and you picked kind of a more slapsticky, which I still enjoyed.
So yeah, I chose Degrassi Goes Hollywood. A little brief history on Degrassi. We don't want to take all of your time because there's a lot of Degrassi history. But in 2001, Degrassi: The Next Generation launched as a sequel series to an 80s series of Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High, both of which were very popular, both of which kind of reached across different generations, which I think is something we'll end up talking about a little bit in this too. But Degrassi: Next Generation becomes wildly popular with the teenagers of the time, of whom I am. And around 2004, 2005, it reaches a really big peak in viewership. This ends up producing a series of episodes that included Kevin Smith, who was a big fan of the series and wanted to work on the new show after he had seen the new material. 4 years later, in 2009, they do a special called Degrassi Goes Hollywood that really caps off the characters of that very popular period while sort of handing it off to the next generation of the next generation. And this was precedented. There was a special after the original Degrassi series called School's Out, where they did something similar, where they revisited a lot of the characters who now are a little too old to be part of the high school plots. And that's really what Degrassi Goes Hollywood is.
So when you pitched this to me originally, I wasn't sure what to expect because I only was vaguely familiar with Degrassi. It was kind of one of those shows that kind of appeared in the afternoon, vaguely. And the only episodes I knew was the episode where Drake got shot because there was a school shooting. Somebody got a drug habit, and I think somebody got an abortion. And I thought that was always the cast that was around. I kind of knew there was people graduating in because I think somebody got introduced, but I did not know there was transitionary films or anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of transition within the series. It's something that I always really appreciated because it's a lot like a real high school. Is characters start off as freshmen, and I think in the case of this, at one point the school it goes from 7th grade to 12th grade, and they never say freshmen, seniors, things like that on it. I guess that's not really a Canadian thing. They say 12th graders. They don't even say grade. They say something else. I think because I remember them saying Niners for freshmen. It's delightful. I like it. But yeah, no. One of the strong points of the show in that Next Generation 15-year run, which is kind of nuts, was very smooth transitions of characters. Some characters they would find ways to stick around a little longer, but it never hit that peak like it did around 2004, 2005 with that particular cast. And members of that cast who had not been appearing very frequently on the show did come back for this special. And I think you, even without seeing the show too frequently, you probably perceive that a lot of this was tie-ups of the storylines.
I didn't even know it was tie-ups. I kind of felt I knew some of them graduated, but I figured they would return later on, just as cameo appearances. And I did not know this was peak Degrassi cast. I kind of figured Drake was part of that era, but again, I'm not super familiar with Degrassi. But I just think that just because it's Drake, and Drake is the most popular name in all of music right now.
I think it's interesting you say that. I would totally say that Drake, yes, he was part of the most popular cast as Jimmy, but I would say for the most part, what's kind of funny is outside of the shooting, his character wasn't always so involved in the biggest plot points, the most talked about plot points, and a lot of the other actors and actresses really get to shine in this movie without him there because, quite frankly, their storylines had become the more popular ones.
Okay, I see. So I wasn't sure if Drake appeared earlier or later in this. So I was kind of confused, but I I enjoyed this movie, even though I had like no context besides that Degrassi is a very ridiculous show, very melodramatic.
All right, what were some of the things that you saw in there? Because I'm interested. I was a big fan of it while it was airing. It was, to steal a phrase from Jim Ross, appointment viewing for my generation. And, I'm always interested to see, like, I know that I have an emotional attachment to those characters. So when I watch the movie, I know some of it's not the greatest movie ever made, but I still enjoy it. And I'm just wondering what that looks like from your perspective.
Okay, so when I was watching this, like I said, I had like very little familiarity with Degrassi, but it was very easy to get into. Like I kind of understood each of the characters pretty immediately. And they also do a lot where like, I can't believe you're like this, and they explain each other's character traits very obviously. And like I think there's one point it's like, you've always acted like a child, even now. And then he walks off.
Marco talking to Paige, who I've
Yes.
always felt was kind of written like Miss Piggy. Like, and that's not an insult. Like, Lauren Collins is great, but like I always felt like she had that like sort of Miss Piggy-esque divaness, and that was from like the second she was on the show.
Yeah, that's a good description because it was like that's her arc in this. I'm not really sure what her arc was like before that, besides like her being kind of I guess self-centered. But it was very easy to like get into it. A lot of this plot is like really bizarre though. Like how many times did the bus break down? Like and this bus, like they go back and forth on this bus so much. It was like, I'm not going to go on the bus. No, I am going to go on the bus. No, I'm not going to go on the bus. And it's like every other scene was like doing something with the bus. It was bizarre. And then like, the whole Kevin Smith subplot, like that's wild because like this is 2009, right? So like
Yeah.
Kevin Smith wasn't super popular.
No, and it's interesting because it's funny. Part of the reason that I own this on DVD, and I do not own all of Degrassi on DVD, though there was a point where I started pursuing that, and I ended up selling them because there's just too much. Uh, one of the reasons I own this is not just because it wraps up sort of that biggest era, is it is a kind of a direct sequel to the 3 episodes that he had been on, where he was shooting Jay and Silent Bob Go Canadian A, and involved a lot of the cast of this in that film. And they do refer to that. They refer to the character Manny having been in that other film, and that's why Jason Mewes wants her for his musical High School, which clearly is a nod to another icon of that era, High School Musical.
I did not know that was actually a thing in the show. I thought this was like a self-contained thing. Like this is the first time Kevin Smith's ever been mentioned. The first time Jake and Silent Bob Go Canada A was ever mentioned. I did not know those were in previous episodes. That makes a lot more sense now.
No, there's definitely a lot to do with that. Kevin Smith, Jason Mewes, not the only cameos we see in this. We get Vivica A. Fox is in there. Another icon of that era, Perez Hilton, shows up to dish some dirt out. We also get a very young Dan Levy, who would eventually go on to create Schitt's Creek with his father, Eugene.
The cameo that impressed me the most was probably Pete Wentz, even though it's a very like that cameo just made me laugh. Just because it's like, oh, they're going to a coffee shop, and then there's Pete Wentz, and his whole thing, that scene is just him like drinking a latte and just standing there awkwardly as these two friends argue with each other.
Yeah, and also Cassidy Pope in that same scene, someone they were trying to push to that level. It did end up on The Voice, had a good career.
Oh, right. She's part of the other, like, making ramen, whatever label, pop emo label that was.
Fueled by Ramen, was it?
Fueled by ramen. That's what it was.
There you go.
Made by ramen. That's
Taking
what
back to my college brain there. But yeah, and just a lot of faces who do show up later on. I think that has a lot to do with the popularity of the show. Like I said, like Dan Levy, about my age, probably watched the show when he was in high school, was really excited to be involved in that project. And I always felt like Degrassi captures, I said my generation before, and this is an interesting thing. We've talked about this a few times off air. I think generations are a lot shorter than they used to be. Like they classify like Generation X as starting in like 1965 to like 1980. And that's huge. That's 15-year gap. I think Generations are literally like 5-6 years now. And I think maybe that's why Degrassi's like popularity tapered off pretty quickly after this cast.
Well, there's like a weird like cultural turnover now where like things burn out really quickly. Like, was it like 2 years ago, Players Unknown Battleground was like the biggest game, and now it's like almost completely abandoned now. Just like this was like a lot of cultural turnover. I think that's more has to do with it. And I think Degrassi is like a public access show, right? I think you mentioned that.
Well, it started out, it was a Canadian, I don't want to say public television because of how their system works a little bit differently, but it was publicly funded. So it was intended to be educational. And that certainly does carry over into the shows before they get extremely popular and like the corporations take them over a little bit. Though my understanding is it still continued to have some funding from the government. You know, this particular film, TV film, I should say, is also occasionally broken up into episodes to be aired. And you can kind of see where those episodes could fall. I think it does run better as a movie. I think Stephen Brogan, the director who directed many of the episodes, very much set this up as more of a TV film than episodes. This goes a little further into the ridiculous than they usually do. Like, there was always a self-awareness, especially in the Next Generation, that like there was a little bit of goofiness. This one takes it to an extreme, but I think that's because of the format. Like, they know that this isn't the kids watching it learning lessons, that this is the fans who've been with it for a long time getting to have fun with these characters pretty much one last time.
Okay, that because I did watch it just all as one movie on YouTube. It's there for like I think an hour and 15 minutes. That makes sense though. It was broken up into episodes because that explains why there's so much drama like on the bus, like every other scene, and like why a lot of these kind of plot lines get kind of recycled throughout, like the whole thing with I think you said Peg is her name.
Paige.
Paige.
Yeah.
All right.
Paige Michael Chuck. Very Canadian.
That is a very Canadian name. But I do like how this is like.
Piss off Canadian fans now. Like, are Canadians going to be angry? We're sorry. We love you.
No, it has to be like some kind
Canada,
of friendship there.
It was great.
But I guess that makes more sense. And then there's like a lot of like weird genres blended into this because this is like every Hollywood movie kind of thrown into one. You get a little bit of Sunset Boulevard. You get a little bit of like the Muppets movie in there. You know, a little bit of like Fame Making You Crazy. So I appreciate it on that level, but I don't think it like blended all that well. But it was entertaining the whole time to watch, at least. And the educational aspect makes a bit more sense with me with like the abusive boyfriend and that kind of out of nowhere plot line about the girl's dad, who was a soldier coming back from Iraq. No, it was Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's where, you know, not watching the show probably affects you a little bit because that's a little more precedented than it probably seems if you're just watching the movie. Ellie's character had some issues in the past, along with Craig, who they had mentioned had gone to rehab, things of that nature. So some of those reactions that probably seem very extreme are precedented earlier in the series.
Yeah, I was like, man, this girl's like not reacting well to any of this. I kind of thought everyone was a bit of an asshole in this, but like I guess there's so much context I miss it.
It's funny because when I rewatched this, so I could, you know, talk about it more effectively after you watched it for the first time, when Ellie does, you know, have that moment where it seems like she's about to commit suicide, I'm like, oh, that must be weird if you didn't know the character.
It was weird. It kind of came out of nowhere. Like she's drinking a little bit of vodka, then she's trying to drive herself in the sea, like Virginia Woolf or something.
It was very dramatic, but it's all like I said. This is really a movie created to serve the fans of that era. I know personally, I did continue to watch for a good few years after that, but the later specials really don't feature much of that cast. You do get cameos from some of them or minor plot points, but that it really was the end of that era.
So, was that the first time you saw the dad in the entire show? Was that like a big reveal?
Oh boy, I'm trying to remember if I don't think so. That's something that I'd have to like go back and research and watch endless amounts of episodes to really figure out. Which, by the way, if you guys are into us doing Degrassi content, please let us know. We will do that episode. We have no shame. And I love it. So we'll have something to talk about, and Christiaan can catch up on all those plot points he was confused about. but I couldn't say for sure. My instincts tell me that we did see him before.
Okay, because I was going to say it's not a very dramatic reveal. Like she goes into the hospital room, it's not like turning around dramatically. Like he's just kind of sitting there. So that's why I was like, is this the first time we're supposed to be seeing him? Is this a new plot line to the show? Like the whole Afghani war thing was very like out there for me. And like the fact that she's apparently like an alcoholic now and like her boyfriend was on drugs. Like, man, there's so much drama and everything in this.
Christiaan, as the ads used to say, it goes there.
Wow, well, that's a blast from the past. I remember that.
That was the height. That was those ads. They had to basically restructure the entire network it was on to fit Degrassi. That's how popular that show was.
Because I kind of get why this show is popular, just because it's like so melodramatic and like kind of out there. The whole plot line with the drama teacher she's dating, who's like abusive and everything.
Right.
Like there is like some learning aspect from it, I suppose, in that. But a lot of this is just like it feels so out there, like compared to shows now, like drama shows now. Like Riverdale is like nothing like this. Like Riverdale's on its own other level.
Yeah, Riverdale's like Psycho Archie. It's just this bizarre show. It's cool though. I like it. But yeah, Degrassi, that self-awareness did carry through everything, which I think is part of the reason it was so popular. Is you need that little bit of a wink when things are kind of grim, but you're also aware of the fact that like the grimness is like contrived. Like you're really putting these characters through hell, and like it's just so constant, as you were saying, like how over the top the things that happen are. Like you only saw like what, an hour and a half of that. Think about like seasons of this and these characters getting like brutalized. You need that levity, and I think they've always been really successful at providing that.
Yeah, I would say that. Like, it never felt dark. I think it's contrasted by like how everything's lit. Like everything's kind of like bright and cheery, like it's Saved by the Bell or something. It kind of feels like a parody of those darker Saved by the Bell episodes, where they just kind of push it as much as they can. And that makes it like enjoyable in that sense. I don't know if I'd be able to watch like entire seasons of this, but like watching in a short burst, like is really enjoyable to me because it's just so like it's like another reality to me, but it's like enjoyable but kind of messy at the same time, and appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point of view. And, you know, I think you're right on the Saved by the Bell sort of influence and where it goes. You know, obviously there is the original Degrassi, which is the biggest influence on what they're self-aware of, if you will. But you're definitely dealing with a generation who also saw Saved by the Bell at the height of their popularity. I mean, we were young, but Saved by the Bell was huge. I think it is sort of a logical continuation of that, where like Saved by the Bell was funny and then occasionally would try to be serious, and where this is saying it's serious all the time, but really isn't.
Yeah, like it's I don't know. It's like a crying clown painting, I guess. Like like it's like yeah, it's supposed to be sad, but you can't help but like laugh at how it's trying to be sad.
Yeah, it's Degrassi. It's one of the greatest shows ever. That's all I can say. Like I can turn it on at any time and be happy, provided it's within the seasons that I like. My patience got stretched as I got older, but I'm sure that's natural. Um, and I hope you enjoyed this show. As always, please check us out on all the social media. Rate us, like us on everything. We're all over the place. We're going to be doing the YouTube uploads a little more consistent again. We talked about this in the past, that we were trying to manipulate that algorithm, and guess what? Didn't work. So that content's going to go up pretty quick. Be sure to check out toystoreguide.com. Support all your local toy stores, comic book shops at this time. They all need it, and they almost all have some way to sell you things via the internet.
Right. Stores need your help a lot right now. And if you're able to like afford anything, even if it's some back issues, go in there and like ask and try to look for something, even if it's small. Every little bit helps.
But I think that's it for us on this one. I think it was somewhat successful, this first Unstable Reactor. The next one's going to be a trip, folks. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christiaan Kutlick.
And we'll see you next time.